Srima, صباح الخير عليكم جميعا. It's a pleasure to actually address this session. I'm going to start by just a background on why this issue of investments in agriculture is a matter of a strategic choice. In our region, we can qualify the economies of our region either under rentier economies. Most of our countries are basically most of their income is rendered through rent activities, and that I think is a very important background to understand what kind of model that we need for food security strategies to work in our region. While what we need in reality in our region is to move from a rentier type economy to a real economic productive activities, including and most probably in Egypt, agriculture would be on one of the very high priorities for the future. One example to illustrate the disconnect between the declared policies and the reality of what's happening in the region is what has been agreed in Arab summits and African summits. In the African Union summits in Maputo in 2003, leaders agreed that they would dedicate 10% of budgets to food security and agriculture investments. Of course, as we speak, less than 3% is dedicated in these sectors in most of the African Union countries. The Arab disconnect is even more staggering. We have seen in Kuwait in 2009, the Arab Summit putting food security very high on the agenda and agriculture investment. We have seen just a few days before the Egyptian revolution in the Sharm el-Sheikh Arab Economic Summit, leaders speak of the importance of food security, of self-reliance or a higher level of self-reliance in terms of production of food and so forth. And the reality, of course, is that this sector has been neglected since 1980 in North Africa and the Middle East. I would even say that it has been even neglected earlier than that. But there is clear evidence that since 1982 today, there has been declining investments in this sector. Gross investments in agriculture relative to total investments has been around 11% since 1980 up till today. In Egypt, there has been a clear decline in the last few years preceding the revolution. Despite that this sector represents 50% of rural population, 35% of agriculture population, 32% of employment, 13.5% of value added in all the economy, and 3 to 4% of total exports. So it is clear that this is about political will and political decisions. It's not about declarations or about technical work that needs to be done by people working in the different governments or even stakeholders and private investment. That's why in Egypt we think that this topic is a topic that has to be dealt with at the level of strategies, and that's why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Egypt is leading the process of thinking about this issue of food security and as it relates to production, investment, and so forth. Now, let me speak about why investments in agriculture have become important and a topical subject recently. 3 drivers. We have the food crisis in 2008, we have MDG targets approaching in 2015, and we have biofuels as a new issue coming in. However, in all the process of food production and agriculture investment, players that are important in this process are players of an international nature. In colonial times, the colonial powers were the equivalent of transnational corporations today working investments across the world in agriculture and in food processing. We can see their control over cash and food crops through the colonial period. After World War II, there was obviously nationalizations. There was also a drive towards industrialization that took away the interest of multinational corporation from production and plantation and farming into processing and upstream and downstream activities. And sometimes we have reached, I would say, a situation where we are now talking about integrated value chains where multinationals are basically working on producing seeds, fertilizers, inputs to the agriculture sector, and dealing with processing of the outcome of whatever is produced by farmers, and bought by farmers through contracts. Usually that is one of the tools of investments today in the agriculture area. Now, if we look at the agriculture investments in general worldwide, we will find that investments in agriculture is trivial. It's 0.2% of all investments worldwide. However, the area where there is a lot of interest in terms of investment is food processing. Food processing is an attractive area. It's an area where a big portion of investments is going. In 2008, 2009, around $90 billion have been pumped into the process of producing and processing, processing food worldwide. And of course, these indicators are quite interesting to understand what kind of investments we can attract if we are thinking of attracting foreign direct investment to our region. Egypt has been in the forefront of attracting foreign direct investment for food processing purposes as a regional hub because of its size, because of the population, the internal consumption capability, and even though that it is a big consumer market, it has only attracted less than $1 billion in the last few years annually. So around $700 to $800 million, 10% of total investments in the last few years, which is, I think, trivial. The geographic patterns of investment actually explains why this region is not even on the map. The MENA region is not on the map at all of foreign direct investment. 78% goes to Asia and Oceania, mainly big players in the Asian continent. Then 15% will go to Latin America, and 7% will go to sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in East Africa. So the picture is really a picture that does not show the region that we're talking about, which is the MENA region. And I don't think that by producing strategies and so forth, we could, or even by making a more favorable climate for business in the agribusiness, we would attract this enormous amounts of investments that are pouring into other regions. And the reason is very simple. As I said at the very beginning, it's about political decisions. It's not about the technicalities of this issue. Now we have multinationals are moving into another form of engagement in terms of foreign direct investment, which is contracting forms with farmers. We have the biggest operation by Nestlé worldwide, 600,000 contracts around the world, producing all over the world all kinds of products into the biggest food conglomerate in the world. We have Unilever with a second position, 100,000 contracts. And then the list is very huge of multinationals, even with no affiliation to food production. We have ExxonMobil now doing biofuels. We have Pepsi doing rice. We have all kind of, I think, I would say, companies and conglomerates that are trying to go where there is maximum profit. And that brings me to the motivation for investments in our region would be that the amounts of investment that can be attracted by the region is directly connected to profitability. And in our region, profitability is very high, and I would claim that that would be one of the elements of a strategy that needs to be developed. Now, the new trends in the last few years is that South-South investment is on the rise and is constituting a big portion of all investments in the agriculture and food processing. And half of the big top 25 multinationals are from developing countries, mainly from Malaysia and other Asian and Latin American countries. But Malaysia is the biggest player with 6 big multinationals on the top of the lists of multinationals working in these areas. Now, one element I think that we need to focus on also is the new actors in the area of agriculture investment and food processing in general. We have sovereign wealth funds. These are now major players, particularly from the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. We have also China and South Korea. They are big players in terms of wealth funds dedicated for that purpose. We have also international public institutions that are at least pledging to increase their intervention in the food security area. However, I would say whatever is translated on the ground is much less than what they claim. We need about $30 billion of ODA to at least sustain the level that we have of food security today in the world, and very little is coming through. We have equity, private equity funds. These are very important players. They are also a whole host of equity funds from all over the world, particularly that commodity prices are rising. They find that the profits are quite huge in this area. Now, there's been a reference to the land grab issue, and I would be very cautious about using this mediatic terminology that has been dubbed everywhere, you know. This process has been going on, as I said, since colonial times. I mean, people have been moving in different parts of the world to try to produce and to maximize their profits, either through, as I said, colonial ties, through transnational cooperation, through farming contracts, through all kinds of forms of leasing and ownership even. And I think the percentage of what we're talking about is very, very limited in terms of the overall picture. And the new forms of investments, which is mainly in contract farming, I think is the major element that today the operators and the big equity funds and sovereign funds and so forth are thinking of in the future. However, we have also players like trading houses. They are very important players in the FDI, but they look at it from a speculation point of view rather than from a production point of view. So that has to be also factored in our view if we want to really become a player, or I would say a baby player in this field. I mean, we, as I said, as a region, the MENA region is nowhere to be found on the map today. If we want to emulate other regions and we want to attract the necessary foreign direct investment, I think we need to shift gears and to have a wider vision of what we want to do with the agriculture sector. The agriculture sector would become the real driver for job creation, I would say, particularly processing, food processing. And that, I think, is the qualitative shift that needs to be considered and studied by all stakeholders, not only governments. I don't think it's a matter of governments, it's a matter also of the different stakeholders. I mentioned yesterday that we have new syndicates in Egypt, you know, that represents farmers for the first time. they will have a role to play in devising new strategies for the future. And we have, I think, the matter of resources that have been mentioned through the discussion, I think, is minor when it comes to our region, because the diversification of resources in the region. We have the region with financial resources on the one hand, with natural resources on the other hand, with land being left without any activity in millions of hectares everywhere. And I think this is really a matter of having a wider vision of what we need to do, a real vision, not declarations or summiteers going here and there and making big promises with very little on the ground. Thank you very much.